Hello, hi, how you doing? I'm Jem Jalal.
Hi, welcome back. I'm Karim Harbott.
Here we are again.
We're in a new location this time, but same faces and hopefully some interesting conversation.
That's right. I've got to make sure to remember to look at the camera and not on the side, so that'll be it as well.
Don't look at yourself, look at the camera.
Yes.
So what are we talking about today, Jim?
So one thing that comes up a lot, a subject quite dear to our hearts as people who've been in the trenches for a while, is component teams versus feature teams. And I think people know what these things are, but they may not know what these words mean. So maybe we should start there.
Let's define them. So let's start with component teams then. In fact, let's start with components.
Yeah.
Right. What is a component? And we're talking sort of mainly software here. Mm-hmm. A component broadly is a bit of the architecture. So you for example, the UI, right? And you hear about often the UI team. Mm-hmm. I'm a UI dev.
Yeah.
Right? You're changing the front end, and then of course there's the back end APIs and things. So I work on this API, and that would be another example of a component. So someone who you don't touch the whole stack, you touch one subset of it, and therefore by definition, when there's a feature, it needs multiple components largely, and therefore multiple teams in order to deliver that feature. So
I'm with you.
That is what a component team is.
Yeah.
And feature teams, why don't you talk to us about feature teams?
Feature teams, I guess, let's try a silly metaphor. So as Karim said, a component is part of something in some way. So think of a cake. Think of a Victoria sponge cake, right? We all know what a Victoria sponge cake is. A Victoria sponge cake is made up of a bottom sponge, cream, jam, and a top sponge, and maybe icing sugar. If you're a feature team, you're able to deliver an even cut across all those layers, okay? And I guess if you're a component team, you can only do one part. And so a feature team is able to provide something which is, I guess, product-centric, something which is meaningful to the end customer. Could you go to the sprint review and just demonstrate a component? I don't know. I'm not sure that my customers want to see an API.
No. I mean, I guess technically you could with a front-end change, a UI change, but then it's not going to do anything behind the scenes, right? It can look nice. What happens when you press that button? Oh, nothing, because the back end isn't there, right?
Yeah, and look, don't get me wrong, there are nuances as to why you may want to do that, if you've created a prototype, yada, yada, and so on. But if value, and we'll talk about this as well, is about bringing the product or something meaningful to the customer to validate where you are, then doesn't it make sense to bring a more true representation of what you've built rather than an element, which can also be risky?
It can. So I guess what you're saying is a component team would be a team that either makes the top layer of sponge or the bottom layer of sponge, or the jam, or the cream in the middle.
Yes.
And a feature team would give you a slice of the cake with all of those things.
Exactly that.
So
exactly
come in, here's my jam. It's like, that's great, but what about the rest of it, right? So a feature team's going to go, here's my slice, and it might not be the whole cake, but it's going to be a slice of it, and then you can enjoy that in the usual way.
Exactly. Now here's the thing. You're going to hear some counter to this. Some people say, yeah, but my team, our customers just want jam. It's fine. Or you may also hear this. But we don't have what's required for us to create a cake. Or you may hear this, hold on, making a Victoria sponge is too big. I don't know, maybe you need to make a Victoria cupcake. Like, are you with me? So remember the premise here, it's about validating learning, it's about mitigating risk, it's about creating something meaningful. The intrinsic motivators get switched on for the people. There's an array of reasons why feature teams provide a benefit, right?
Loads, and you touched on a really, really interesting one now. It's it's from a person working in a team, right? It's like the old metaphor of the first person smashing up rocks with a hammer, and you ask them what they're doing, they say, I'm breaking rocks.
I love that.
The second person is doing the same. You say, what are you doing? They say, I'm building a wall. And you ask the third person, you ask them what they're doing, they say, I'm building a cathedral.
Yes.
Right? Now, which intrinsically is going to be more motivating to you? Thinking your job is to break rocks, or thinking you're contributing to this wonderful cathedral? And that's what I've observed over the years. People who work on component teams, because by definition, the features that come through to them aren't features, they are technical changes. Change this component to do this, to do that.
Yep.
The customer benefit of that is lost.
That's
and
right.
you think, why am I doing this? I have no idea what the end product, I'm too removed from the customer. Whereas when you work on a feature team, you implement this customer-focused feature now.
Yes.
So what does this do? This person can now pay with Bitcoin. So that is something, and you get close to the customer experience through doing that, and it's far more motivating. It all goes back to the autonomy, mastery, purpose, and it gives you a much broader view of the purpose, and it stops you just being a cog in a machine. But that's the first real benefit for me.
This is great, and maybe one way, because some people get into a debate over, are we a component team or a feature team? So here's my question to a lot of my peers and people that I teach is, tell me the last time you saw what you created bring a benefit to the customer. And if you're unable to answer that question, the likelihood is you're probably part of a component team. Okay, and not every component team is made equal. In other words, some component teams have the bottom sponge, but they can also do a bit of cream. And they may be a little bit more connected than others. So it's just not binary. Are you with me? There are gradients to move through. But for me, as you say, the human part here is, if I don't get to see the impact of what I am doing and what I am making, it could become a bit monotonous. You know, just on the assembly line, putting that bottom sponge together every day. And
it's assembly line mentality exactly. It's the sort of hyper specialization, right? I guess we should rewind a bit and say when we talk about benefits. My assumption is if you're watching this, that you are after some level of agility, the ability to flow value through the system quickly, the short cycle time, get feedback and inspect and adapt on that feedback.
Yeah.
If you're trying to achieve something else from the system, maybe component teams are the way to go.
Sure.
But for me, in all my years of working with agile transformations and teams and networks of teams, I found one of the biggest structural barriers has been component teams, because we've talked about one of the reasons that feature teams I find more effective from a motivational perspective, but dependencies.
Yes.
Right? If you have a feature that touches 4 components, and if you're a big complex organization, your features will probably touch lots of components.
Yeah.
And you need to implement that. You are now saying we need to involve 7 teams in the creation of this one feature.
Yeah.
So someone has to do which teams are going to be affected? Someone has to turn that customer specific feature into small technical features.
That's right.
Those teams will have to write some code. Someone's going to have to stitch it together at the end. Someone's going to have to end-to-end test it at the end.
Yep.
And who owns all of that stuff?
Yep.
Right? And it starts to sound very waterfally. And by the way, how do we coordinate between those teams? You end up with those boards with the red string everywhere, or however you want to track your your dependencies. And this it doesn't help flow value through the system. So
no.
you bake in those dependencies by default if you design that way.
And these are great points. And something, if you think about the word agility, and Scrum word is one way to create agility. So think of the word agile, right? Let's just keep it clean. Your ability to change direction at speed. Okay. If your competitor is able to get something out to the market to test it far earlier than you, and they have less dependencies, it's just simple Darwinism, right? They're going to be more competitive, and they're going to survive longer. So when people say things like, don't be dogmatic, not everything needs to be a feature team, I hear that, I understand that.
True.
But you've also got to be careful though that you may be saying that because once you start to surface what you need to do to become a feature team, it takes a lot of hard work. Yeah. Here's a simple one. I had a head of development and a head of test, and one of the reasons why a developer couldn't help test was because they were siloed as managers, and the view was no, we don't create Victoria sponge cakes. What I do is I bake cakes. And what do you do over there? I create jam. So the whole identity is siloed. And as a result of that, your ability to go from concept to cash is hindered. And the effect of that might mean, you might be building the wrong thing, and you might be really slow to market, and you might have built the right thing, but by the time you've got there, it's not relevant anymore. And we've not even spoken about the human factors and the impact of that, which Karim's alluding to. So, I mean, what are fair cases to be a component team?
I tell you what I hear a lot. They say, first one for me, hey, Karim, we are a big, complex product. It would take too long to get people in the team able to touch these 5 or 6 components. Right? So there's the technical complexity of how do I get on a team of 9 max, if you're doing Scrum, right? Development team of 9 maximum. How do I get all those skills in there?
Yes.
And the second one will be, yeah, but it's more efficient to have people specialize in one area. Right?
Yes, yeah.
And I think we should probably unpack both of those now. And say, you know, sometimes they're valid arguments. Sometimes they're a product of thinking which isn't entirely aligned with what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So first one, big, complex, messy products.
So I mean, here's the thing, right? Whenever I get into these conversations with clients or peers in new teams, always often what they have is a big monolith. And you don't need to be technical, I'm not, to know this much. When you've got an architecture that's like spaghetti, whereby we're talking about dependencies, to get one idea out from your head to the market, it takes, you know, half a dozen teams or a dozen teams. It means that things have been created in a whereby no team can be autonomous, all right? And to go from a monolith to, like, you know, microservices or whatever you want to go to can be costly and it can be intimidating. And often the people who are going to be trying to make those new decisions are the same peers who have created the monolith. So now we're dealing with issues of people saying, oh gosh, I might have got it wrong. So there's that part. And the other part is the capability part. Have they got the knowledge and the know-how to actually now say, we've got to keep the business wheels on, but how do we now start to decompartmentalize our architecture to do this thing? So there's a kind of an ego thing going on, which is very natural, right? And there's also a knowledge and capability thing going on.
For sure.
These are hard things to solve.
For sure. And investing in people to grow beyond their one specialism is something that you know, creating T-shaped people, this is an extension of that, right? It's like, okay, so you touch the UI, how about you pair with someone to touch the back end? And by the way, what we're not saying is every single person in the team needs to be able to do everything.
Yeah.
It's the same as the whole, your Scrum team needs to, or your development team needs to be cross-functional, right? Just because you need testing skills, business analysis skills, programming skills, technical documentation, whatever that might be, doesn't mean every single person on the team needs to be able to do that. It just means somebody does. For each of those things, you need to be able to point to someone in the team. So maybe you start small, and if your product is not a huge product with hundreds of components, maybe you say, you know what, we mix this UI team up with this back-end team, and we create two teams with half UI, half back-end, and they collaborate more.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the more we're able to collaborate with the people who are doing similar work, the better. There's no point in designing something beautiful on the front end which the back end folk can't implement because it doesn't work. Like, wouldn't you want them talking? In which case, wouldn't you want them sitting in a team together and just focusing on delivering a feature? And now there's just by the way, part of this feature is a front end change and part of this feature is a back end change. You folks sit together and work out the best way to do that.
Sure. And, you know, here's the thing, right? Some people don't know what they don't know. I understand that there's a genuine case with that. Many of us are, you know, want to stay in the status quo because it's more comfortable. When I think about what's better, feature or component, ultimately the question I want to ask is, what is value? And if value is about creating something end to end that can bring some sort of positive impact to your customer, nearly always that involves a number of things working together, a number of components. If you genuinely are saying that we sell sponge, top sponge, bottom sponge, buckets of cream, buckets of... Great, that's fine. But if that's not the case, it's worth pondering that thought, because Scrum, Kanban, XP or not, here's the bottom line. It can affect your ability to compete in the market if your competitor can test their ideas earlier than you.
Yeah. This goes way back to the new product development game, Harbott Business Review paper of 1986, right? Takeuchi and Nanaka, where they said, it's a great paper, you should definitely check that out and read it. It's if you haven't already. Now it's about, they talked about multidisciplinary teams,
yes,
right? Having engineers, usability people, QA people, production people who build this thing, having them collaborate together, you know, moving down the field, passing the ball back and forth. That's where the whole rugby analogy came from, right?
Like the opposite of like they say, the opposite of a relay team.
Yes, I'll do my bit, hand over to you, you do your bit. And they found the former was far better when creating products than the latter, and that's where that's one of the patterns that Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber used to build Scrum, right? And this is an extension of that. It's saying, why don't you collaborate with those people? So this just takes that to the next level, I guess. And this doesn't come up in standard Scrum because you only have one team, right? But when you go beyond the single team, which, let's face it, most of my clients and the clients that we talk about everywhere, the product is non-trivial, right? So they're not just having one team, and so suddenly you have to think about, well, how do we structure? And I'd strongly urge the component over the feature. not always, right?
Sure.
Majority, I would say, and there's always the exception where it makes sense to do this.
I mean, look, just let's just let me extend my silly metaphor, okay? I'm sure you'll remember it. It's just so terrible. Let's just say we have got a cross-functional team that create a Victoria sponge cake, okay? Yeah. This one team can do it, but once a year there is a special occasion whereby there are some customers who want golden sprinkles on their Victoria sponge. Okay, but to make these golden sprinkles takes a very deep specialism and it's very difficult to do. So it might not be worthwhile for our team members to learn it. In that case, it may make sense that a component team or some sort of external service provides us with it, because it's not something that we see on a regular basis. And so you can have a component team providing a service to a feature team. Are you with me? But I just wonder how many Victoria sponge cakes there are with golden sprinkles.
I've never seen one, but that doesn't mean they're not out there. Right? But you're right. It makes no sense for everyone to learn that. Right? Every now and then, super specialised thing that you're not going to do very often. Now, in my world, it was COBOL programming. Was the last class client I was working with.
Wow.
Do we really want to make people or everybody now? You're talking to someone who started their career as a COBOL programmer, right?
Wow.
I wouldn't inflict that on developers. So do you know what? There's just a group of people who do that well. They love doing that. They're paid well to do that. They've been doing that for the last 30 years. Go and do your thing.
Yeah.
Now, as soon as you start needing to do that more, then we need to debate a little bit as to whether we want to bring that in or just keep them as an external team.
Yeah.
The thing I want to talk about is Karim, it is more productive. I get that a lot. It's more productive if we focus on our specialism and everyone focuses on their specialism. So let's unpack that one a little bit. Have you had that one?
All the time. I mean, I can totally understand this because if I'm sorry to go back to the sponge cake. You can tell I'm on a diet. I'm just thinking about cake. But if you've only ever made sponge, you've only made cream or jam or whatever, it's understandable. Then you're going to be able to create more of that because it's what you know. It's back to the T-shape. And for me to pair with Karim in the jam team, and I've got no skill in jam.
You're giving me jam.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I would have thought you were giving me cream.
Head of jam or cream. I was thinking about his cholesterol, but then his sugar's just as bad. But here's what's up. If I'm not that great at it, I'm going to slow you down. And if I slow you down, that means our throughput, our velocity, or whatever we deliver is going to be less. And so often in some businesses or in many businesses in the 21st century, they're still thinking about what am I getting my value's worth of Karim?
Well, do you know what? Let's talk about. I don't know. Is anyone getting their values worth for me? That's a different question.
Sure they are.
Let's talk about that because your velocity, right? What velocity is stuff, and I'm always intrigued that people use the term velocity because for me, velocity is a vector, right? It implies direction, whereas I think what people actually mean by velocity is speed. How much stuff? Now, whether it's the right stuff or not. Doesn't tend to come into the equation. So you may deliver less stuff, but what you deliver will be customer valuable stuff, right? And you'll be able to inspect and adapt more quickly and therefore deliver the next highest value thing. Because one of the hidden dangers of component teams is, what if let's go back to your Victoria sponge. What if I am the jam team, right? Yeah. All I do is make jam. Well, we've got a ton of jam. We don't need any more jam. What we actually need is somebody to make the top level of the sponge. I was like, yeah, but I don't do that. So let me keep making jam. Now my velocity is high, but who cares? Because I'm just now building up a jam mountain.
Fantastic example.
Would be more of a jam.
And on top of that, your appraisal at the end of the year is to measure how much jam you've delivered, even if that jam has not been put into some form of product, it's not created a return on investment. But again, this is back to the old Tayloristic mindset, the manufacturing assembly line. People need to be busy. It's motion versus progress. Yeah. As long as they're doing stuff, there's value. So there's much to unpick here.
There's a lot to unpick. And so often we come back to these two things. It is efficiency and adaptiveness. And over and over again, if you design for efficiency, you reduce adaptiveness. If you design for adaptiveness, you by definition introduce inefficiencies.
Sure.
But what's more important to your survival, is it the ability to adapt and respond to a world that changes, or is it your ability to do this known thing with as little input as possible, which for a long time was true. But I think we're more the latter now.
Well, I feel like this could be a subject in itself where we talk about healthy variability.
Yeah.
And we can talk about why things like Six Sigma may be useful on the manufacturing line, but when we move into the innovative space, we see different kinds of mentalities.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, Henry Ford turned his production of the Model T from multiple days down to an hour and a half by hyper specialism, right? But
Impressive.
how much variability is there in building the same Model T every day? We're not doing that. We're building new stuff, and that's the critical difference. So we want to think less about efficiency and more about building the right thing, and to do that involves adaptiveness.
Exactly that.
Or agility.
Yeah, well, this is the thing, right? And that's why I say, look at the word agile in a dictionary. Can you change direction quickly? If you can't, and your competitors can, will they get the better of you? Are you with me? So when people say, hey, why are we trying to push feature teams over component teams? Go back to deciding what value is, and if you can't validate what you build early and often, there's risk there.
There is. And a final point, think of the poor product owner. How's the product owner prioritizing one technical change versus another technical change?
Of course.
Right? Oh, should we do the front end first or the back end first? Who cares? I need both of the ends in order to deliver value, as opposed to actually a feature. Oh, this feature's cool. This brings customer value. I want to prioritize that now. Team,
spot on.
Give me that. Test it end to end. Make it work. Make it be done. And then ship it. Get feedback on it.
And that's why we have technical product owners, because the structure of the system,
which doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. But the thing is, you can kind of empathise, because what's happened here is there are people hiring other people into a role within a system that supports a mentality that says, hey, you're in product, worry about product, but get involved in the technical details, because you kind of have to, because you're trying to prioritise stuff, but it's technical. And then you start to infringe on the creatives doing the work, the developers, and then before you know it, intrinsic motivation, the empowerment piece, all those other great things that you mentioned, they start to get affected.
There are, and like I said, there are, as with all of these things, it's not as black and white as maybe we've made it seem today.
Sure.
There's a lot of nuance, and there are times when you want to do this, and there are times when you want to do that. But in all of the most effective organizations I've seen building software products, the majority of their teams have been feature teams, and the component teams have been by exception. If you'd like to know a little bit more about this stuff, I would strongly urge you to check out the Feature Team Primer by Craig Larman and Bas Vodder. You can Google that.
Yes.
You can just Google the Feature Team Primer. You'll see that come up. It's free. There's a free chapter from their book, I believe, as well. If you like that stuff, and I like almost all of the stuff from those two folks, then you can probably check out some of their books and their writings. But Less.works has a section on it on their website as well. Go and check this out if you want to know more about the why behind this. And good luck. None of this stuff is easy to do.
No.
It takes time, and maybe how to transition might be the subject of another chat, because it's a non-trivial change. But like with all things, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right, and nothing that is easy provides a ton of value. And this is definitely not easy, but it's really, really worthwhile.
It's spot on. And you may be that Scrum team who are like full-blown component, or you're kind of you're halfway there or whatever, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. What we're trying to do is not make you feel bad about it, but just know where you are, know what your aspirations are, and there's a gap, and you've got to see the gap to begin to kind of move forwards. And that's if you want. So great resources offered there in terms of where to learn. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks
for watching.
Until next time.
Adios.